Welcome back, viewers, to the second part of our podcast today at WMD-Channel, anti-war, pro-people channel. So, welcome back. So, in this episode, we will talk about the upcoming, the ongoing, I should say, the NATO summit in a very tumultuous year where US seems to be reviewing its ties with NATO and Europe seems to be reviewing its own security arrangements. And this must be understood in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. And I think it is also important to note the recent escalations, the attacks by Ukraine on Russian infrastructure, oil refining infrastructure, and also in civilian infrastructure in Crimea. And in this backdrop, we have also seen the news that Russian troops continue to be progressing, and they are moving closer um, uh, to their aim. And it appears that they already have 20% of Ukraine under their control. And it is also important to note that General Douglas McGregor uh, at on a podcast I heard yesterday said uh, something quite startling that we don't often hear in Western media. He said that the regime in Ukraine does not have popular support of Ukrainians. It is so that was a very startling statement to come from. Not that I doubt it. It only appears natural to us, but it came from him. And he said that this regime is being propped up by weapons, mercenaries from Western countries. So these are really interesting times in America when people are coming out and opposing traditional policies. People who have worked with establishment. There was Joe Kent and Douglas McGregor. These are interesting times. I mean, hopeless as they are from a humanitarian perspective, um, there are glimmers of hope here as well. So, Oliver, I would like, in the spirit of open discussion, for you to reflect on these issues and other issues that you consider as relevant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samanth. I know that we agreed that we should try to make this a fairly succinct broadcast because I'm sure there will be plenty of other opportunities in future to try and get our minds around the what I call NATO's proxy war with Russia. I'd like to use this opportunity first of all, to explain my perception of where we are currently with this war. So that's as best I can. This is a discussion of what I believe to be not so much the facts, but the major alternative narratives about the facts, or more simply, the main narratives about what the facts are. And I think there are two of those, and I'm going to come back to those just in a moment. But I will also try, and I will try to do it as succinctly as I can. I will try to explain why and I've been following this very closely now for 4 years through my Substack column, Empire and Communication. I've been following this since before the war started. Indeed, I published a book in 2015 about how Western mainstream media had covered the original coup d'etat that occurred on the streets of Maidan in 2014 in Ukraine. So I need to say this just so that people do understand that at the very least, I have had a background of looking at this issue from a fairly minute perspective. I've been looking at the detail of this for longer now than I care to remember. And I am also very appreciative of the fact that normal people, people who don't have time to follow all these all of these thousands of different stories in the mainstream media, they all seem so important and they're all so complicated. How can you begin to make sense of any of this? And I totally get it that most people whose knowledge of the world depends only on a fairly superficial rummaging through our mainstream media, whether visual, print, podcast, whatever it is, they're kind of surprised that there's any other narrative than simply, oh, there's this little guy, Ukraine, and it's being bashed around the head by this big, big bully to the east that calls itself Russia. And yeah, we support little guy against big guy. We support poor old little old Zelensky against wicked, evil, corrupt former intelligence chief Vladimir Putin. I need to explain why I don't follow that. I need to explain it not because I think I can explain it so that you'll be persuaded. It'd be nice if you were, but I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think it's important that you should at least be aware that I, along with a whole chorus of people who are more experienced than I, more knowledgeable than I, more immersed in the military-industrial framework than I, who on this point actually agree with me. So that's where I want to go over the next few minutes. Let us start with where we are now, and now is July the 7th, 2026. We've just lived through the first day of the NATO summit. There's an annual summit for NATO, and this year it's taking place in Ankara, in Turkey. And some of the main events that have come out, we've heard, we've listened to President Trump say that he didn't think NATO did a very good job. It didn't come to US support on Iran. I think he's wrong about that, by the way. I think he got a lot of support from the West over Iran, only the West just avoided the headlines. He said things like, yeah, I think we're pretty close to a resolution of this problem in Ukraine. And that kind of sounds soothing and kind of nice, only we've heard that now. I don't know how many times Trump has said that we're almost there. You remember he came in, even before he came into office, he was telling us how he was going to resolve this within the first day of holding the office of presidency. And so now we get this assertion by Trump that we're almost going to get an agreement. And the evidence, President Trump, what is the evidence for this optimism of yours? Zilch, nada, nothing. There is no evidence this time or any other time that we've heard this from President Trump. Proof, you get Zelensky getting up at the same summit conference and saying, yeah, well, you know, you gotta, NATO, you guys, you gotta let Ukraine in. Yeah, we belong to you. We should be a member of NATO. Oh, now, why was it that Russia went to war with Ukraine in the first place? Oh, I remember now. It was that Russia was dead set against Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. Once again, Zelensky comes out with his basic position, which is the only thing that we can live with by way of resolution, if you parse my words carefully, is Russia's unconditional surrender. And ladies and gentlemen, that ain't going to happen. All right, what's going on the battlefields? Two main narratives. In a way, they are both true. First narrative, the narrative that you will hear most of all in the mainstream media right now, and it is important. And I say it is important because I know that some of my colleagues in the mainstream media, I beg your pardon, in the alternative media, don't want to hear this. They don't want to regard it as serious. I regard it as very serious for Russia. I think these Ukrainian drone swarms are very serious for Russia. They have taken down, they have done significant damage to the vast majority of Russia's main oil refineries. Crimea, which voted to become part of the Russian Federation when it saw the fascists move into power in Kiev back in 2014. Now, Crimea, which seemed such a solid, substantial, secure part of the Russian Federation. Now, what are we? Gasoline shortages. 14 districts in Crimea have, they don't have rationing. It's simply that if you're a citizen, you can't get gasoline. That sounds to me pretty serious stuff. And then I also read on a daily basis about how the city of Belgorod, the Russian city of Belgorod, practically every day now is taking terrible hits from Ukrainian drones. So Russia has challenges. I don't dispute that for one moment. Does it mean that Russia is losing the war? No, it doesn't. Actually, I'm going to argue that Russia is winning the war. Does it mean that Putin is now going to just throw up his hands and say, oh, I'm ever so sorry, I should never have done this. Please, Mr. Trump, give me a way off this, an off-ramp to this terrible trajectory that I chose back at the beginning of this war in 2022. Is he going to? No, of course not. If anything, what is happening in Russia right now is there is a growing split between those whose positions are hardened against Ukraine, but who still continue to support Putin, who has most of the time, in my humble assessment, demonstrated amazing coolness under fire, amazing ability to detach himself from emotions, an amazingly cautious, clear-thinking adherent to the principle of rational thought. Something that I see no European leader come anywhere close to Putin in these virtues, and they are virtues. But now he confronts a situation where a large number, we don't know what number, all of these things are disputable, but a large number of Russians who feel that if Putin keeps on being cautious, Russia keeps on getting pummeled, Russia keeps on getting humiliated, Russian national security interest is no longer the guiding principle. He has got to go. When would he go? Well, they actually have elections in Russia. It's a democracy. It may not be the kind of democracy that you think we should have. I think it's not a bad democracy. It's definitely got problems. Is it a better democracy than the United States? No, maybe not. But I have a very low opinion of US democracy. If Putin has a rough time in the upcoming elections for the Duma in September this year, he will be pushed aside. And this policy of caution, how is he cautious? Well, have you seen him actually destroy Kiev yet? Yeah, you've seen some pretty impressive smoke and flame over the last few days. Have you seen Putin actually hit the command centers, the decision-making control centers in Kiev? No, you haven't, because he hasn't struck them. Some Russians are beginning to ask, why not, Vladimir? We want this war over quickly. We're fed up with it. If he does badly and his United Russia Party does badly in the upcoming elections for the Duma, I think Putin, despite his popularity is not the same thing as people approving of his conduct of the war. He is very popular. He is rightly a very popular figure. He rescued Russia from the clutches of Western Wall Street monopoly capitalism during the 1990s, when Yeltsin had pretty much handed over the country to Washington. That's why that's why Russians find Putin a very popular man indeed. But do they think he's fighting this war in the best way? Increasingly, they're having their doubts. So what we now need to, so I've conceded that Ukraine is making significant impacts. Why, by the way, is it making significant impacts? Because European countries are pouring more and more money, more and more effort into feeding drones and drone technology and to Ukraine and producing drones on their territory, allowing or turning a blind eye to the passage of Ukrainian drones over their territories or from their territories. We are seeing more and more European investment in this war. That's something we need to come back to. And that is why Ukraine is not doing all of this by itself. It's doing it because of European support. The United States pretends to have distanced itself from Ukraine. In a way it has, but only in the sense that Trump has persuaded his European partners in NATO to shoulder the main costs of weaponry for Ukraine. Europeans are now paying the money that is sent mainly to US weapons manufacturers, who then send these weapons after a considerable period of time, by the way. These things don't happen in a matter of weeks, sometimes not even a matter of months. But eventually, they are sent to Ukraine. Europe is increasingly paying for this war. And in Ankara today, Trump is still pounding on the table. You guys are not doing enough to pay for the war in Ukraine. You should be spending way more, a much higher percentage of your GDP on defense than you currently are. But he's gone a long way to shaking Europe up into feeling nervous, making Europe feel that the United States is not necessarily going to be there when they need the United States, trying to figure out, well, what should we be doing then if we can't depend on the United States anymore? Well, they are doing that kind of thinking, although mainly what they're doing is trying to create a scenario where the United States feels it has to go back directly and do the full Monty. The Europe desperately wants the United States back into this game, because in its heart, despite all of the blather and froth and bubble that's coming out of jokesters like Friedrich Merz, Chancellor of Germany, would be the new history. He would be the new Hitler of Germany, only he just doesn't have the character for it, which I suppose we can be thankful for. But he is now, it used to be Great Britain, but Great Britain is now increasingly a joke. So now Merz has stepped into the role of key European rhetorician in favor of escalating Europe's engagement in the war with Russia over proxy Ukraine. Is it winning? No, it's not winning. You just have to look at the map, and you just have to follow the day-by-day movements of Russian forces, as I have been doing in detail for the past 4 years. And you can see it may not be as quick as you or I think it should be. Maybe it's not as fast as a Hollywood movie. Maybe it's not as fast as those World War II movies that we grew up with. But does it really matter if you take a city in 2 days, 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 years? What does it matter if at the end of the day you control the city? That seems to me to be what matters. That's how Russia is winning this war. And all along the combat line, every day is just a little bit further west. And now, increasingly, what you see is behind the immediate combat line, there's a big area, I would say between a third and a half of the Ukrainian territory that has already been occupied by Russia, an area that is under Russian fire control. In effect, Russia it's not that far away from controlling half of Ukraine, and it's pushing the Ukrainian drone launchers and all the other paraphernalia is pushing them further westwards too. Russia is bombing the gas stations. Russia is bombing the trucks. Russia is bombing the parking sites that are used for drone launchers. Russia is bombing the railways that are used for the shipment of materiel. The Ukrainian army can't play this drone game anymore by still being in eastern Ukraine. It's being pushed further west. In that sense, and mainly, and that's an important sense, Russia is winning the war. Are they suddenly about to throw in the towel and say, oh, yeah, you've been having a hard time, and yeah, we don't like your drones very much, so why don't we have a ceasefire? It's just not going to happen. There are many reasons why it's not going to happen. But let me try and unpack this a little bit more. Why did this start? Why did this start, this whole war? Is it because Russia is some weird dystopian problem in the Russian DNA that just wants to make it go to war with people? Of course not. Nothing so silly, although you do hear a lot of silly stuff coming out of European capitals about the existential nature of Russia. No. What happened was that when the Soviet Union collapsed and it became the Russian Federation, just before that actually happened, the final premier or president of the chairman, Communist Party chairman, President Mikhail Gorbachev, made an agreement with the United States to this. I think it was a bad agreement. Yes, okay, you guys want to unify Germany. Okay, well, we've had our problems with Germany in the past. So, okay, yeah, we'll say yes, we can live with that. But you guys, NATO, that's it. You can't do any more creeping eastwards and threatening our territorial security. You can't do that. West says, fine. And this agreement, even if it isn't codified in a treaty, as many people would like, it is so well documented from so many sources. There's no doubt in my mind that is what the West said unanimously to Gorbachev. That is what perhaps they intended. Did they do it? No, of course they didn't do it. Immediately after the formation of the Russian Federation, NATO began to expand. It began to suck in all of the former members of the Soviet Union, all the countries of Central and Eastern Europe into its membership, and Putin, right from the beginning of his presidency, even Yeltsin in the late 1990s, when he had time off between taking vodkas. Even Yeltsin was saying, warning, this is not good. This is not going in a healthy direction. This is not what you guys promised. Putin picked up that banner. Time after time after time, he's been saying to the West, don't go there. Don't keep doing this. Because our security is just as important as your security. No one has special rights when it comes to national security. We are important as well as you. But was anyone paying attention? Of course not, because the overall narrative from Washington was basically there hadn't been a war with Russia. Russia collapsed for all kinds of reasons, but it wasn't because of a war with the West. But the West behaved as though it was the winner of a war. It behaved with the lack of charity, with the racism, the racist attitudes of the victorious class, and all the entitlements that come from power and from wealth. Did Russia feel good about it? Of course, Russia didn't feel good about it. It tried very hard to play nice. It tried to get entry even into NATO, but was summarily rejected. And all along, more and more insistently in his speeches up to around about 2010, 2011. You've got President Putin saying, this is the path to war. If you think Ukraine and Georgia are fair game, did the West listen? No, of course it didn't. And then in the months, so we have the Western instigated coup d'etat in 2014. The United States, Victoria Nuland of the US State Department openly saying, yeah, we spent $5 million, basically, $5 million destabilizing Ukraine, ready for a coup. That's pretty much what she owned up to. And that's exactly what was happening. So there was the overthrow of a democratically elected, we can argue, did you like him, Yanukovych? Did you not like him? Did you agree with his policy? Forget about it. He was democratically elected and he was going to stand for re-election within a few months of the coup. If people wanted him out, they would have booted him out, and that might very well have happened. But in this game, the West doesn't like to take risks. So an unelected regime is installed following the coup in Kiev. It immediately comes out with a spew of anti-Russian policies, delegitimizing uses of Russian language, even in Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, things of this ilk, delegitimizing the presence of Russian language media in Ukraine, and other clear affronts and insults to the Russian heritage and culture of a good part of Ukraine. And the people in Crimea, who are predominantly Russian-speaking and pro-Russian, after all, that's where Sebastopol was, which is was then and nominally still is the head of the Black Sea, center of the Russian fleet. The people of Crimea asked Russia to be integrated into the Russian Federation. I know a lot of people think that that's all Russian propaganda. I actually don't think that is Russian propaganda. I think there's plenty of evidence to say that is actually the correct narrative. That is what happened. And the people of Crimea, in all polls that I have seen since then, are still very happy that they made that decision when they did, because it turned out, even now, it turned out to be the right decision. But people say, yeah, okay, so that's awful. The West did all this, all that. But surely, Dr. Boyd Barrett, what can possibly justify the invasion of a one power by another power? Surely that's illegal, isn't it? You can't do that. And I say to them, you're just not paying attention, are you? First off, Russia had been trying very hard to capture the attention of the Biden regime, or to the democratic regime in 2021, because the United States was erecting supposedly nuclear defense facilities in Romania and in Poland, which of course can always be in a second. These can become nuclear offensive assets. And we've got the supposedly liberal new president, former comedian, and I think MI6 frontman, Zelensky, saying to the West, oh, please give us nuclear weapons, give us nuclear weapons. In the period 2014 to 2022, had Ukraine and had its European sponsors to the so-called Minsk agreements of 2014, which were signed after the defeat of the Ukrainian army at Debaltseve by the independent republics of the Donbass, with support, of course, from the Russian Federation. Had anyone paid any attention to the Minsk agreements? All that they asked for was to give the integrate them into Ukraine, absolutely, but let them have more autonomy. than they've had up until now. It's not a big deal. Did anyone in Ukraine listen to that? Of course not. And we now know that Ukraine and the European sponsors to the Minsk agreements, including Germany, they were signed by German Chancellor, the German Chancellor of that time, Merkel. They were totally, the idea was, yeah, let's just play the Russians along. And in the meantime, we will develop all kinds of fortifications throughout eastern Ukraine in preparation for this upcoming war. On the field, Russia was fully aware that the Ukrainian armed forces were mobilizing in preparation for an invasion of the independent republics of the Donbass. And by the way, note that those republics were independent. Russia wasn't even interested in integrating them into the Russian Federation, and they didn't particularly want to be members of the Russian Federation. They just wanted to, a little bit more of autonomy, a little bit more independence within this highly centralist, sort of Western-governed Kiev establishment. It was clear Ukraine, with the support of the United States and of Europe, was preparing for war with Russia. Now, I'm very pleased to be able to say this today because just yesterday I was listening to a former British Commodore of the British Royal Navy say exactly the same thing, which I have been saying for at least 4 years now, and saying it just as I will say it now. If your enemy is engaging in acts that lead you with perfect rationality and clarity to conclude they are going to attack us. So do you stand? Do you plead with the United Nations? Oh, to bring pressure to bear on these naughty people on our border who want to kill us? No, you don't if you're living in the real world. What you do is you prepare for war. And do you wait until the other side decides that it's a nice sunny day and it's a really good day now to have a war with Russia? No, you don't wait for the other side to decide what day the war is going to start. You decide that because you want as much advantage as possible. That is the story of the so-called special military operation by Russia in February of 2022. Now, I'm going to tell you the saddest thing of this entire narrative, Samantha, which is probably very well known to you, but maybe not so much to any of our viewers. By March, so the war began in February 2022. By March 2022, I'm not remembering specific days of the week or dates, but by March, there were already negotiations. Yes, Russia had sent a small symbolic force into Ukraine and symbolically surrounded Kiev. And negotiations, and Zelensky agreed to negotiations. They were in Istanbul. They were overseen by our dear friend, President Erdogan, who somehow manages to get himself into all of these kind of situations. And in Istanbul, in March, both sides to the negotiations agreed, they signed off on a draft agreement, a draft treaty of peace. What would this have cost Ukraine, do you think? Right. Number one point, Ukraine will not join NATO. Number one deal. And there were one or two other conditions, like, okay, so the Donbass remain part of Ukraine, but just as we asked in the Minsk agreements, they will now enjoy a greater measure of autonomy of their own affairs. They're a different race, after all. They're a different ethnicity. They are pro-Russian. They're much more Slavic. They're much more pro-Russian. And there were some other conditions. That agreement was almost at the point of being signed by the majors, including Zelensky, of course. What happened? The UK, the then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, an odious, obnoxious kind of Oxford graduate politico, a loudmouth, a blabber. He comes in, flies into Kiev and says to, having talked, of course, to NATO principals, having talked to Washington, Volodymyr, you can't sign this. No. We won't support your signing this agreement. But tell you what we'll do. We will give you everything you need to defeat the Russians in battle. Everything. You ask, well, and so, well, Zelensky falls for this. Or maybe Zelensky always was an agent of some kind for Western intelligence. That is a serious idea that is seriously entertained by many people I know. And so we have a war of 4 years duration. I've long ago given up paying much attention to the figures that we are given for people's killed and people's injured, because I think that is the primary field of propaganda. My rough and ready conclusion is that Russian casualties, they're nowhere near the 2 million that we often hear about. I would put it, I'd be more likely to put it at the 500,000 range. And also I would say that Ukraine, whatever that Russian number is, Ukraine has almost certainly at least doubled it. What sheer stupidity is it? But it isn't stupid, unfortunately. Well, it is stupid, but then again, it isn't. What can possibly justify this expenditure of money and of life on this conflict? Because who cares about the Donbass unless you're actually living there? Who cares? Who cares? Who in their right mind would care about this to the point of risking nuclear war? It's evidence, in my view, of the seriousness with which the authors of the RAND report of 2019 called Extending Russia, the seriousness with which the authors of that report, which is a part of the US military-industrial complex, they outlined the different ways in which Russia could be taken down. And one of the principal possibilities or opportunities was Ukraine, was the bid to pull Ukraine right out of the Russian orbit, which is what happened in 2014, because Yanukovych was about to accept a much better deal so far as international subsidization was concerned from Russia than it was actually being offered by the European Union. But to pull Ukraine into the Western orbit and thereby provoke Russia into precisely the kind of reaction that we have seen Russia take, but not with the consequences that were predicted by the authors of the RAND report. Because what have we seen? Despite all of the propaganda from that's distributed through Western media outlets about the problems that the Russian economy is having, this, that, and the Russian economy is actually pretty healthy for a nation that is at war. One of the reasons why it's so healthy is because of Western sanctions. All of the Russian capital stays in Russia, is invested in Russia. Industrial and weapons production has multiplied by X number of times. The Russian army, the Russian armed forces are far more powerful than they were in 2022, far more experienced. They are a real force now to be reckoned with. I wonder whether Europe understands when it fabricates lies about Russian intentions to invade Western Europe, for which there is absolutely no evidence. I wonder whether Europe actually really understands what it would take for them to defeat an aggressive Russia on the battlefield. Because honestly, you see the way that these European leaders behave, and all the pathetic state. You got Kaja Kallas, supposed sort of foreign minister of the European Union, standing up the other day and telling us, yeah, we need to go and destroy the Russian Federation. This is coming from the former, what was she, defense minister or something of Lithuania or Latvia or some of these pathetically small Baltic countries that seem to be the tag, the tail that wags the European dog now. I am very angry, as you can hear. I'm very impassioned about this debate, not because I think Russians are superior people, that Russians are morally better people, or anything of that kind. I do admire the speed with which, under Putin, Russia has modernized. There are many admirable features of what happened in Russia in the years 2000 to 2022. I myself have visited Moscow and St. Petersburg on various occasions and have been suitably impressed, not just by evidence of modernization, but also the richness of Slavic culture and Slavic history. Brings us back to this issue of civilization, doesn't it? Which perhaps we need to defer to another day. But kind of at the heart of that discourse is about the Western presumption that the Western way is right. The Western civilization is all wonderful. It's all good. Yeah, sure. We were responsible for at least 2 world wars. Yeah, it's true that we did massacre the Native Americans. Yeah, it's true. We did have all those empires. Yeah, and those empires were quite brutal when you come to think about it. But we also produced Van Gogh and we got the Louvre and we got Notre Dame and we got cute little coffee houses in Amsterdam. We must be a great civilization, right? No understanding of the complexity, the depth, the richness of Russian culture, of Chinese culture, and that's another, let's not go down that one just yet. Indian culture, Indonesian culture, and so on and so on and so forth. West is best. Western might is Western right. And frankly, if I saw a world that seemed to actually benefit from that, I might be a little bit more sympathetic to the argument, but I don't see a world that is that much better or impressive as a result of all the Van Goghs that we may have produced, and I don't get it, and I am not a knee-jerk supporter of Western civilization, and a lot of the things that I do respect about Western civilization, like math and engineering, were actually Arabic and Chinese anyway in origin. We just stole
and Indian and Indian.
And of course.
So yeah, so. Yes. So thank you very much. I think one of the issues which I would like to learn from in perhaps a future broadcast is culturally how Russia and Ukraine are placed and how cultural differences, if there are cultural differences, how they are exploited. But being from a different region, not paying too much attention, it appears to me that they are fairly close enough. I do understand that they seem to have 2 different churches, but it doesn't look like very hostile. In fact, no culture should be inherently hostile to another. But there is one question though that I would like to end with, in general, the mainstream coverage that we see in India is better than what we see in US, largely owing to its history, especially given the disturbing trend of Americanization of Indian media and aligning positions with US. So we do see broad understanding that it is a proxy war. There has been this expansion of NATO eastward and color revolutions and some reflection on it. But what I also see increasingly, yesterday there was an editorial in The Hindu, one of mainstream important newspapers, along with Times of India. And the editorial yesterday was saying that this is the time for peace on Russia-Ukraine front. And you appear to be saying that that's not a realistic possibility just as yet. So I would like to understand. I mean, so there is a kind of exasperation that doing business with Russia is getting increasingly difficult, and they would like to buy more oil from Russia, and if only the war would end and Putin would keep his gains and stop, we could just go back to business. I've also heard, the other news which we need to perhaps get more information on that due to this suffering of Russian refining capacities, though it is able to export crude, it is starting to import refined oil. And there is a talk that India is sending some of the refined oil now to Russia. So we need to see what the numbers are. So whatever it is, so why, what would it, where is it in terms of, territorial or security gains that Russia needs to make? And, you know, yeah,
Yeah.
why is this not the time to settle?
Yeah.
Especially given what appears to be Trump's interest in settling the issue, contrary to previous US administrations. So, if you could quickly address this issue of
Yeah. Yeah, I will try to be very succinct on these important issues. So just very quickly, the West and Ukraine keep on coming back to the ceasefire. Yeah, we need a ceasefire on the existing combat line. Now, why should that be so difficult? We have frozen conflicts in other parts of the world, well, Russia has two fairly immovable principles that make that an impossibility for Russia. So first of all, Russia has very clearly stated that its main objective, apart from simply wanting to prevent Ukraine being a member of NATO, its main objective is to consolidate so far as Russia is concerned, Russia has already integrated 4 oblasts of Ukraine into the Russian Federation. This is now part of Russian law. That's in addition to Crimea. Crimea is already part of the Russian Federation, and these other 4 oblasts are Kherson, Zaporizhia, and most importantly, Donetsk and Luhansk. So Russia is refusing to do anything. It's not totally, it's complicated, but Russia is pretty much holding its ground on, we got to have the 4 oblasts, and the Ukrainians have to withdraw from, at least from Donetsk and Luhansk, the traditional Donbass, and maybe also from the other 2, which constitute Novorossiya, a broader area of historical importance. But Ukraine's they've got to get out, and then maybe we can begin to talk about Syria. But Zelensky never wants to hear that. Also, Zelensky keeps repeating, just as he has today in Ankara, the same things that he knows Russia absolutely rejects. He keeps saying, oh yeah, we need to be a member of NATO. Well, we already know that that's an issue of existential importance for Russia. It will never accept Ukrainian membership of NATO. And also, both Ukraine and the Europeans keep on, they're like the clucking of chickens, honestly. The number of times you hear this, that, oh yeah, okay, well, there may be a ceasefire, and then it's going to be perfectly okay, just so that Ukraine feels safe, that there will be security guarantees, and that involves NATO troops coming into Ukraine, guaranteeing our peace. And Russia just thinks that is a load of BS. Rightly so, because as soon as that happens, of course, NATO forces with their feet on the ground in Ukraine will be preparing for the next round. Russia wants a settlement to this war. That will be a permanent settlement. Now, I think some of us maybe exaggerate. Well, some of us are inclined to take Putin at his word. I just want the four oblasts. That's all I want. That's all I've ever asked for. I don't want you as a member of NATO, and I don't want you having a huge army anymore. And I don't want these Nazi parties in control anymore, like the Azov Brigade and their political wing, and one or two other conditions. And maybe that's it. Maybe we don't really know, do we? But I am one of those who think that when you really ask yourself, what is it that Russia requires to feel that it has secure borders in face of an aggressive, hostile, presumptuous, privileged, entitled European Union? They've kind of done it. You know, they've taken a good part of Kharkiv, the oblast of Kharkiv in the northeast. They've kind of established a pretty wide buffer zone now in the oblast, the northern oblast of Sumy, and right above Kiev of Chernihiv. They've also, many times, Putin has expressed his view that Odessa is historically Russian. He regards Odessa as Russian. And I think, personally, my belief is that Russia is not going to walk away from this conflict, not having spent so many lives, not having spent so much wealth. It's not going to walk. It needs something a little bit better than the four oblasts. And those are going to include Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, probably Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhia and Kherson. Well, we know about Zaporizhia and Kherson, but also Odessa and the remaining part of the Black Sea coast to the northwest of Ukraine, up until you get to Romania, I think it is. Yeah. I think Ukraine and the West is going to walk away ultimately from this conflict either pretty beat up and bruised and poor. I think that's the most likely outcome. Or we're all going to be dead because the West will keep on escalating. It will force Russia to begin to hit Western military assets, Western military production facilities, maybe symbolic, maybe Notre Dame again. It's already burnt down once. Why not burn it down again? That will impress upon the West. If you want to mess about with a nuclear power, think it through before you start. And Russia now has some pretty devastating non-nuclear weapons that the West does not have, such as the Oreshnik is the one name I always do remember, but there are some other pretty impressive weapons that Russia has recently produced that could do real damage to the West. You've got one weapon, I wish I could recall the name of it. It creates a sort of nuclear explosion at sea. It creates a tsunami that would be sufficient to wipe out Florida anyway. And perhaps New York, if you put your mind to it. It's either because, escalation games are very difficult to stop. And we've got an escalation going on that seems to have reached a point where it's going to be very difficult for either side to step off from. Europe has to walk away feeling bruised and battered. The United States needs to, just as it did in Iran, needs to be humiliated once again, just like it was in Afghanistan, just like it was in Vietnam, because I guess the United States doesn't care about military failure so long as it can still extract money from public taxation to the military industrial complex and its defense industries. So long as it continue to do that, we're all happy, are we? Not at all. But another major humiliation for the United States will be a requirement, I think. And I think it will be the most likely outcome, personally.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, with regards to weapons, I think one of the most impressive weapons, which should ideally stop further escalation, was Bureshveshnik, which is like a 200-ton missile. And it's the only missile with like a nuclear reactor running it. So with this kind of missilery that can fly around the world for months, in haphazard patterns before taking off targets. It's war should not be a proposition.
Yeah.
However, as you have identified, there still have been humanitarian costs for this one as well. Well, Oliver, it's been a rather long evening. I think both videos were quite long. But I think they were informative, and I think in this video you have explained an unpopular position in Western mainstream media. So it took us a time, and I think this can actually serve as a video that stays and can be circulated whenever these questions come back to the context.
Right.
So thank you very much for taking time out this evening, and I will look for the video and I'll be in touch.
As soon as possible. Thank you, Samantha. Take care. Bye now. Bye-bye.
Bye.